Hello everyone, I started this podcast, Spare a Thought, in an attempt to shine a light on the people, ideas, issues and organisations that are often overlooked or misrepresented in the media. My name is Tom Spare, I'm your host. In this episode I speak to Amanda Hamilton, Director and Patron of the National Association of Licensed Paralegals, NALP. Together we delve into the crucial role paralegals play in helping the public gain access to the justice system. Amanda shares insights into her fascinating career in law, how she rose to become CEO and now patron of NALP, and the significant impact of legal aid cuts in 2013 and their impact on the justice system. We discover the skills needed to become a paralegal and how artificial intelligence is impacting the legal profession. Just as a note, Amanda mentions the acronym LASBO in regards to legal aid. LASBO stands for the Legal Aid Sentencing and Punishment of Offenders Act 2012, which was introduced during the coalition government to reduce legal aid. So, with all that in mind, let's get into it and spare a thought for access to justice.
Thank you for inviting me, Tom. My name is Amanda Hamilton. I'm currently a director and patron of the National Association of Licensed Paralegals, NALP for short. I'm the former CEO as well. I was the CEO for 14 years until a couple of years ago. I came into this role accidentally in a way. It was never my ambition to be CEO of a professional membership body and awarding organisation, but that's what it has become, it's grown into. My original way that I communicated with the sector was way back in the mid-90s, 1990s, not 1890s, although I am quite old. 1990s, I became redundant and I saw a course advertised and it attracted me. So I actually paid for the course and went on it, and I was absolutely bowled over by it. The course was accredited by the then CEO of the National Association of Paralegals. So it was an accredited course. And I thought there's so much potential here. That's how I first got introduced into the paralegal sector. I then decided I could set up my own course because I saw the potential for undergraduates, law graduates, people working within law firms who are unrecognized. And I initially wanted to give them some practical training. So I developed a training course, realized that my thing was teaching, and I started communicating with the chief executive of the association. And we got talking about the sector, about how it could develop, everything like that. And I started teaching for that organization as well as teaching my own courses, my own training programs. And over the following 12 years or so, we became very close. We discussed all sorts of things to do with the legal sector generally and how we can push the paralegal sector forward. In 2008, he decided to retire and offered me the position to take over the association, which I jumped at with both hands. And I took the organisation from being a small sort of home-run business membership body in Cornwall to London and started developing it to bring it to the legal sector generally, and made contact with the Law Society, the Bar Council, and all the membership bodies at the time, as well as the regulatory bodies for the legal sector. The legal sector at that time was just changing. There was the Legal Services Act 2007, which created regulatory bodies for solicitors, barristers, and legal executives, as well as conveyancers. Each one of those membership bodies now had a regulatory body to govern them and regulate them, with an overarching regulatory body called the Legal Services Board. That statute happened and became law around about the time I took over the association. So I started making noises with all the regulatory bodies, the overarching Legal Services Board, discussing with them the role of paralegals. And at that time, the paralegals were regarded simply as law graduates who couldn't find a training contract to train to become a solicitor, and were taking on these paralegal roles, in inverted commas, to gain experience before finding the training contract they wanted. And indeed, paralegals, it was a time of uncertainty in relation to what a paralegal was, because nobody actually knew for certain. The term had been brought over from the United States, where paralegals were assisting attorneys over there, probably since the late 60s, 1960s. But their role is very limited in the United States, whereas over here, a paralegal role is limited up to a point, but there is an awful lot that a paralegal can do.
Is there a definition, a sort of clear definition of what a paralegal is? If you were to look in, if you were to go to a dictionary and say, what is the role of the paralegal?
The definition is that a paralegal is someone who's been trained and educated to perform legal tasks and offer legal services, but who is not a qualified practicing solicitor, barrister, or legal executive. Sorry, I should say chartered legal executive. So in many respects, a paralegal is trained in the same way as a solicitor is. Could have a law degree, could have even taken the qualifying exams to be a solicitor, but for some reason doesn't want to become a solicitor. Or it could be somebody who's come straight from school, who's worked in a law firm, who's been trained and educated to deal with certain types of legal cases, whether it be property matters, conveyancing, or whether it be will drafting or probate matters after somebody dies. So they're trained and educated to perform certain duties in relation to those specific areas of law. Or it could be a barrister who's trained, who's gone through the appropriate qualification to become a barrister, but who's not fully qualified and able to practice because maybe they haven't found a pupillage to do so, so they set up their own paralegal business. So it's basically a lawyer who has got qualifications or who's got experience that makes them able to perform legal duties and legal services. That is the definition of a paralegal. Somebody who's trained and educated, possibly qualified with a law degree or with a paralegal qualification, who's able to offer those legal services, save for the reserved activities. So when I took over, it was thought that paralegals were just sort of a cheap labour force for solicitors to take on and give them a bit of experience, without actually realising that paralegals could be branching out on their own as if you like, a fourth arm of the legal profession, offering legal services directly to consumers. And this is the message that we've been trying to get out ever since. And indeed, we have a system of membership. We have a licensed system whereby experienced paralegals can actually apply for a license to practice, meaning that they can go out there and offer services directly to consumers. Clearly, there are some things they are not authorized to do, and those kind of services are referred to as reserved legal activities, which by the Legal Services Act are only authorized to solicitors and barristers to do. For example, a paralegal cannot go to court and stand up and present his or her client's case to the court. That's called a right of audience. And a paralegal cannot conduct litigation, meaning that whereas a solicitor can receive and send out documents on behalf of a client, in other words, receive service of documents from courts, etc., a paralegal cannot do that. But what a paralegal can do is take an individual through the process of, if they are being taken to court or if they want to take somebody to court, a paralegal will help them with forms and court documents and procedure of how to do that themselves. Whereas they can't sign a document on behalf of a client, they can fill in the form and the document themselves, and get the client to sign it and send it into the court themselves. So there's an awful lot there that a paralegal can do, and that's what we've been trying to push forward. And in addition to offering membership to paralegals, we also became an awarding organisation. So Ofqual is the government body that regulates qualifications in England. In 2009, the end of 2009, we became an Ofqual regulated awarding organisation. So we've developed qualifications for paralegals, solely for paralegal qualification, nothing else. And those qualifications, we're just actually developing a new suite at the moment from level 3, that's kind of A-level standard, right up to postgraduate. So level 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Currently, we've got level 3 and 4. Level 5 is coming out late summer this year. And then 6 and 7. We have got a current level 7, which is going to be redeveloped in a couple of years' time. So we offer a career pathway to qualification. We offer membership, various categories of membership. And we also offer those experienced paralegals a license to practice. Along with that comes a lot of criteria that they must fulfill. For example, getting professional indemnity insurance in place and so on and so forth.
Has that role, since that legislation came through to govern the way in which a lot of the legal system works, giving a framework and sort of standards, has the role of the paralegal changed in that time?
The role of the paralegal hasn't really changed. It's taken its own path to grow. But the vital difference between solicitors, barristers, and chartered legal executives, and indeed licensed conveyancers, is that those professions are all statutory regulated. The paralegal sector is not. One of the first things I did when the Legal Services Board opened was to approach them for regulation for the sector. And basically, I was informed there was no necessity for it, and there's far too much regulation in the sector already. But I believe that there was a misapprehension about what a paralegal was in those days. Over the years, there's been talk of some kind of regulation for paralegals in some way, shape, or form. In 2018, there was the Mason report, which basically looked at the unregulated legal sector, i.e. all those people offering unregulated legal services to ascertain whether it's worthwhile trying to regulate them in some way or another. And they made certain recommendations, but nothing has been done about that at all. So right now, we have a sector that fulfills a very important role, both supporting solicitors in law firms and supporting consumers in legal services outside of the regulatory system that are hitherto, if you like, unregulated statutory in a statutory way. We at NALP offer voluntary regulation. So we encourage people who are paralegals to join our association, and we have very strict codes of practice and rules by which they must adhere to. So the 2007 statute did not really affect the growth of the paralegal sector, or indeed the growth of NALP itself. It just meant that there was more of a distinction between those legal professions who were statutory regulated and those who were voluntary regulated.
Could you tell us what legal aid is? And then also, I suppose it's worth talking about the legal aid cuts that happened in 2012 during the coalition government.
Legal aid used to be available for any individual who was forced to go to court, either to defend themselves or to bring an action against someone else. And here we're talking about more civil actions. That is to say, if somebody breaches a contract or if somebody is negligent causing injury to somebody else, these are what we call civil actions where one individual can take the other to court. I'll come to the criminal side in a moment. But it used to be that if you were put in a position where you were forced to take somebody to court or forced to defend yourself, you could get legal aid. And legal aid would be offered subject to application, subject to means, subject to the merits of your case. An application could be put through, and dependent on the financial situation of the applicant, a certain amount would be offered to assist that individual to get legal aid and assistance. Criminal cases, I'll just set aside for the moment, but you mentioned the LASPO. LASPO changed all that because what it did is it virtually eradicated civil legal aid. That means that now legal funding, as we now refer to it, is only available for the most urgent type cases. So if someone was made homeless, if some child care matters, something to do with families, there are very few cases now where people can apply for legal aid successfully. And that means that most people are put in a very precarious position, because if we think about the cost of instructing solicitors and barristers, they're not easily within the pockets of most people. Solicitors may charge anywhere from, well, I suppose a junior person, £150 an hour to right up to £600 an hour for their services. Barristers, and of course it is possible to go directly to a barrister now, may charge £250 to £500 an hour for their services. It's not within most people's means. And yes, there are ways that you can gain the services of a solicitor, or a solicitor particularly, by utilizing what we call a no-win, no-fee basis, where a conditional fee arrangement, if you like, whereby the solicitor will take on a case if they think it's worth taking on, will do the necessary things, and will then take a lump of any damages or compensation after they've won it. Yes, that is possible. There's also possibility of using insurance to help you with a legal matter, depending on what it is. But for the rest of the people, it's a difficult, precarious position to be in. And this is where paralegals can actually step in, because paralegals do not charge as much as solicitors and barristers for many different reasons. Whereas a solicitor may charge, as I say, roughly around £200 an hour to do a particular job, a paralegal may only charge £30 to £80 an hour to do the same job, depending on what it is. I know a qualified barrister who is not practicing who will charge £80 an hour for his services, as opposed to if he was practicing, it would be more like £280 or £380 an hour. But for most things, a paralegal would charge £30, £40, £50 an hour, which is, I think you'll agree, a lot more accessible to consumers than paying for solicitors and barristers. So in that way, on any civil matter, paralegals do a really good job. Criminal matters are slightly different, because where there is an element of somebody being prosecuted for a criminal offence with the possibility of them being incarcerated, they do have access to duty solicitors on the legal aid side, and they do get assistance that way. But, criminal and civil matters actually have to be quite distinct for those reasons, but also because there are different courts, different personnel. It's a different system, if you like, than the civil side. And we hope that there are far less people that are in need of the services of solicitors and barristers on the criminal side more than the civil side. Civil actions can be anything from a neighbour taking you to court because they disagree where your wall is and they want an extra foot, to somebody who's agreed to paint your house, starts painting it and then runs off, to sort of breaches of contract or somebody negligently causing an accident that causes injury. So these are the kind of things where legal aid is no longer available and where paralegals can step in.
So really, paralegals keep the wheels and cogs of justice turning in many ways because of the different roles they play.
Yes.
When the pandemic came, in what ways did the legal system have to adapt? Because obviously, it had to adapt very quickly. It's an in-person sort of experience, to go to court, to do all the paperwork and everything. In what ways did it have to adapt, and how did that, if at all, affect the role of paralegals and the people that your association licenses?
To answer your first query, was how did the legal system adapt? I think that it did happen rather overnight. And the way they adapted was to make it a distance thing. So, for example, I think instead of having a hearing where people gathered in a courtroom, this was all done online. Either, depending on the type of hearing required, it could be done by the phone. For example, in some large civil cases where there needed to be a costs hearing of some kind, it could all be done via a phone link. And though I do believe that when it came to the actual final court case, it would be heard in a courtroom with distancing and so on and so forth. But all the way the legal system adapted really was by using a lot of emails, phone hearings, sometimes Zoom meetings, and so on and so forth. So it didn't really stop the legal cogs turning in any way. It just changed it quite substantially. And I know that where documents had to be delivered to the court, they could be delivered and put in a central sort of, I know at Royal Court of Justice in the Strand, they had a sort of central post box for all documents. So you didn't actually have to see somebody in person. You just post the document in this box if it was required. But a lot of it changed to online emails, secure document systems online, and so on and so forth. And as for how it may have affected paralegals, I don't think it affected them very much at all, because they would have done exactly that, done a lot of meetings online, sent a lot of documents online by secure means, and so on and so forth. So generally speaking, it didn't stop the wheels turning, it just changed how they turned, if you get my gist.
Have a lot of those practices remained in terms of the more move to online, and I guess, are there any other positives in how, because we hear a lot about the justice system, and we hear more about prisons, for example, the other end of the legal system, and obviously we hear about the backlogs that there still are from the pandemic. So are there any positives that came out from it? I mean, the technology side is obviously a big one.
Yes, I think the technology is the big one, and they do, they still operate very much online. So it's, in some ways, it's been a positive thing. It's very clunky to have to prepare physical documents and post them or take them to a court physically. It takes a lot of time and effort. Whereas now a lot of it is still done online, and it's a much simpler, it's never easy, but it's a much simpler way of dealing with things. And probably at the other end, easier to manage as well, in some respects, I would think, although the courts would probably disagree with me because they're always inundated. But as we know, with the backlogs going on, but there's always been backlogs. And, this probably has made it, I would think, work a little smoother. That's my take on it. But I could be wrong, and no doubt there may be some people listening in who would disagree. But
yeah, we might get a load of complaints, Amanda. I don't know.
We shall see. But that's my experience and my opinion, and I'll make that clear. The pandemic was, in some ways it clearly had a bad downside, with people's health and long COVID and all these terrible things that happened, but it did make people, organizations, systems sit up very quickly and decide that they had to do something, which is the plus side in many respects. But apart from that, I don't think there's been too much effect on the paralegal sector at all. Just like I think that, apart from obviously personal medical reasons, it hasn't really affected in a bad way the legal system. It's just changed how the processes work.
From a consumer point of view, in terms of I purchased my flat during the pandemic, so and I found it a lot better because a lot of the documentation was sent, all of it was sent online.
Yes, exactly.
And I think for the user, the end user, you have more time to sit with that information as well, rather than waiting for the documentation to be posted to you, or you needing to go to collect it from a place that it's sent to you into your inbox, and then you can sort of sit on it a bit longer, and it sort of speeds that part of the process up, I would say, as well.
I think, yes, speeding up the process, I would agree with you.
And obviously that then generates more work on the other side because you've got a quicker speed. Yeah. Administratively, the people listening are interested in joining the legal profession, and particularly paralegal. Because I used to work in the higher education sector, so I used to support a lot of students in various different ways, and a lot of lawyers, student lawyers, people training at Cardiff University and so on. Would you say, what skills does a paralegal need, and what makes a good and an effective paralegal? Because obviously you can have the skills, but actually to be able to apply those skills to the work.
I think anybody who's interested in the law, there has to be a certain interest in the law and the legal system. And just like if you were thinking of studying law at university or becoming a solicitor or a barrister, you'd need certain technical skills in respect of being very pedantic about the law and distinguishing one law from another, one case from another. So I think, the skills are universal, i.e., being able to read and understand certain legal processes, certain legal points, being able to write in a very clear and distinct way. Being a people person always helps, because by the very nature of what we do, we are listening to people who are distraught. They have a legal problem. They don't know how to deal with it. And so we have to be reassuring, empathetic, calm them down. So there's a lot of skills involved in the legal profession generally. And I don't think paralegals are any different to solicitors in that respect. The skills are there are multi-skills required, good listening skills, good writing skills, analytical skills. You need to be interested in the legal system. You need to be interested in the processes. You need to have a lot of research skills as well, because any time somebody comes to you with a legal problem, you need to be able to locate where you can research about it. Most lawyers, whether they be paralegals, solicitors or barristers, know a little bit about most areas of law. But clearly, we're not machines. We don't know everything about every area of law, which I'm sure you're going to be coming on to in a mo. So you need those skills to enable you to research and find out what is necessary, be able to distinguish one thing from another, be able to read a statute, for example, which isn't easy, and understand what it means, what it says, and be able to relay that and interpret that to a layperson. So there are lots of multi-skilled functions that you need to have. I would say that ultimately it's having a great interest in the legal system in this country, which is unlike any other legal system anywhere in the world. The English legal system is unique It's based on what we call common law, whereas most European countries, including Scotland, including the Republic of Ireland, are based on the European system of law, which is what they call a civil law system, where they have laws written down. We don't. We have a multifaceted, different system where, yes, there are statutes, there are acts of parliament that create the laws, but there are also courts that interpret them. And it's a fascinating relationship. How do the courts influence new laws, or how do the court's decisions influence a change in law? And that change happens by, moral changes in attitude of society. So it's a multifaceted, interesting area to study. And I think primarily somebody who wants to enter the legal system as a practitioner needs to have that love of it. It's fascinating in many, many different respects. It's not just a profession to go into because you think you can earn a lot of money. I think it has to be a vocation. Yes, it is possible for some lawyers to make a lot of money if they're very good at what they do or the type of work that they do. But ultimately, you are offering a service to consumers. And it's a service that consumers probably don't know much about. Therefore, that people person, empathetic attitude must always be there, together with a vast knowledge of the legal system, practice and procedures, or where to locate them. So I would hope that would answer your question in a kind of roundabout sort of way.
It does, yeah, and it makes me think of a couple of things because I've never studied law or done any law modules at university, mainly because I've seen the size of law books as well, and that's always intimidated me slightly. But I would say politics and law, there's this intersection between politicians and elected officials creating legislation, and then the legal system sort of interpreting it, and obviously lots of politicians are former lawyers and whatnot. But I guess it's that thing, isn't there, of being a student of the law. You never stop learning. It's always there's probably not any limit to the learning that you do throughout your life in the legal profession. Is that a fair assessment?
That is a very fair assessment, and of course the law changes all the time. I mean, it's constantly changing. It's a nightmare when you're trying to develop qualifications, because it takes about 2 or 3 years to develop a qualification, by which time there could be a huge change in the law of the subject area you're writing about. So, yes, it's constantly changing. And yes, you're absolutely right. You need to have a love of it, and you're constantly learning, constantly. So the system, the legal system has changed irrevocably since I first studied law, which was, a good 45 years ago. It's changed out of sight. Both my parents were lawyers, and I think they'd be turning in their graves right now because they wouldn't recognize the legal sector generally. They certainly weren't aware of paralegals because they hadn't really reared their head when they were around properly. The legal system and the legal personnel have integrated and have interloped with each other. So, for example, now you can have solicitor advocates. There was always a distinction between being a solicitor and being a barrister. Solicitors were the people person, the person who consumers would go to when they had a legal problem. They would tell them where they stood. They would then instruct a barrister to give them a review of this client's case in legal terms, to write a report on it. They would instruct a barrister to appear in court if necessary and advocate on behalf of their client. And then in 1990, the law changed. The ruling was that some solicitors, if they wanted to advocate, could become solicitor advocates. Because we've always had two separate professions in this country, unlike anywhere else in the world. The United States have got attorneys, France has got avocats, Portugal and Spain have got abogados. These are all attorneys that do both jobs. Both jobs, I mean solicitors and barristers' jobs. They see the client, they appear and advocate for them in court. Whereas over here in England, we've just got two separate professions. And there's been discussion since I was a kid about merging the two professions together. It will never happen. So as a compromise, they allowed some solicitors to become solicitor advocates. And it used to be that you could never instruct a barrister as a consumer, as a member of the public, directly. You had to go via a solicitor. But in the early 2000s, they changed that ruling and said that barristers could apply to become direct access or public access barristers. And today, most barristers are public access, which means you can bypass a solicitor and go straight to a barrister if you want to. And if you can't afford to pay for a solicitor and the barrister, that's what you do. So over the last 20, 25 years specifically, the legal sector has changed out of all recognition. And paralegals is just another way it's changed. And there is room for paralegals to take up the slack that has been left by a change in legal aid legislation. And it's very important, in my view, that consumers have the choice to go to a paralegal and pay and gain access to justice at a more reasonable cost than going to a solicitor or barrister. And I'm not putting down the role of solicitors or barristers at all. I'm just saying that for those people who can't afford it, it's a way of ensuring that they do get access to justice.
Which is because otherwise there's the end of legal aid, or the severe reduction in it, creates a sort of two-tier system, doesn't it, between the haves and the have-nots? And
yes,
and the whole basis of the legal system is meant to be fairness. So it sort of undermines that key principle of the English legal system, I guess.
Yes, access to justice for all, basically.
Yeah.
And without paralegals, that would be limited. That's why they are such an important part in the legal system at the moment.
Yeah.
Who knows where it's going to lead, but at the moment they are.
I suppose that leads on to my final question, which is about artificial intelligence and the role that technology is changing the profession. Because I've sort of read, I take an interest in this through work at Nesta, because we're always looking at new technologies and innovations. And there's this piece where I've seen reports on, a high percentage of roles in the legal profession will change in some way. Could you talk about that and what sort of discussions have gone on within the paralegal world, but also the wider legal world about artificial intelligence, the role of technology, and so on?
Well, I can talk about it from the viewpoint of NALP and qualifications. It's, from our perspective, AI is useful for students, no doubt. And it's becoming more and more difficult to stop people using technologies such as ChatGPT and all those other accessible AI systems online to complete assignments and so on and so forth. But I do think that in general terms, it's a useful tool for people studying, as long as they can distance themselves enough from it to take what they need and assimilate it in their own way. Now, but the danger, of course, is copy and paste. As far as AI is concerned, generally in the legal professions, I cannot see that there will be in the future a holographic lawyer dealing with an individual person's legal problem. I cannot see that myself. Maybe I'm just old-fashioned. But I feel it's a bit like the medical profession. Would somebody want a holographic image to look at or discuss their medical problems? And how would that work anyway? So, I think AI, there's lots of discussions about AI. I think it has its plus points. I think it can be very useful in some ways to assist lawyers, to assist paralegals, solicitors, barristers in research, in locating what they need to locate. But if we take it a step further, I can't foresee that ever happening, that an individual human being will be replaced by an artificial intelligence in any way. Because at the end of the day, humans need other humans to be able to feel comfortable. I do know that a lot of universities are having a lot of difficulties with plagiarism, more so than any other time. Like we are, we're having difficulties with plagiarism as well. But I think in some ways that's always been around. It's just more easy. It's easier for students to gain access to it.
And so, yeah, and it's cheaper. I mean, so, because I graduated from my undergrad in 2013, and there was lots of discussion about essay mills and people paying for people. So it's always existed in different forms where you've either paid a person or you're signing up to a technology that assists you. I guess it's the rapid nature of the retrieving that information. And I've spoken about I've done an episode on the cuts at Cardiff University, and I was talking to a representative from the UCU, and he was making the point that you can use it. You can create a first-class essay with ChatGPT or another type of large language model, but it's how you apply that knowledge. It's not, it's about how you use that information. And for me, I see it as, artificial intelligence is that aid, that assistant that can sit beside you, and that tool can retrieve it. But then you have this other part which Silicon Valley and other parts of the world are pushing, which is artificial general intelligence, where for the first time there will be a alternative mind that is available other than the human mind, and we're no longer the top dog in the chain. And allegedly we're getting closer to that, and that it could be, it's not a case of hundreds of years, it could be years, But again, that's a dream that technologists have been chasing, since people started writing science fiction, I think.
Well, yes, Asimov and all that. So yes, indeed. I mean, if the whole idea of robotic intelligence or holographic intelligence taking over the world or whatever is very sci-fi as far as I'm concerned. I'm very interested in sci-fi anyway, but I think it will happen, but it's a question of whether we put on any restraints on its development and how we manage that. But I think at the moment it's a useful tool and should be kept as a useful tool. I'm just very, very concerned about the state of education, and we have rules for our learners that basically says you can use AI, but you've got to assimilate it, translate it, and regurgitate it in your own words. We all know how difficult that is, because you can never really, except if you're extremely bright and articulate, we never think, oh, that just doesn't sound the same. I'll just use that phrase to put in there, because it sounds much better. But, so I fear about that, but I do think it's a useful tool to have for speeding up research and drafting documentation and so on.
They're all my questions, actually. So, I don't know if you had any final thoughts at all.
It's just been a pleasure discussing something that is something that I'm actually fervently in favour of paralegals, and I thank you very much for inviting me to discuss the role of paralegals in the paralegal sector. It's been enjoyable. Thank you very much, Tom.
A big thank you to Amanda Hamilton for being my guest today. I really enjoyed speaking to Amanda and to hear about all the great work paralegals do to help the public gain access to the justice system. In the show notes, you'll find the link to the National Association of Paralegals website, as well as a link to Sperafor Instagram and my Substack. The title track for this show is Young Shall Grow. Credit and thanks to Afro Cluster, Magugu and Asha Jane. The show was researched, written and edited by me, Tom Spare. This has been a Be the Change Media Network production. Thanks for listening.